So here we are. We're live. Hello, Phil.
Hello, Stephen.
How are you doing?
Yeah, really good, thank you. How are you?
Yeah, I'm having a good day. I've been working with some really interesting clients today, and the sun is shining for the first time in a while where I live. So yeah, it's all good. And thank you very much for doing this.
Thank you.
I think we're probably going to be together for about half an hour or so, and we've got this subject of mind coaching, which we're going to get into in a little bit. But just before we do, for people who don't know, who is Phil Wickham?
Carl, what a big open-ended question. So I would describe myself as increasingly so, an unconventional skeptic. So there is very much two sides to me. So I'm a rural country Suffolk girl who's always lived with the fact that my mum was born and grew up in Sri Lanka. So I always felt my life was super boring until I actually did something with it. So went to London, felt I had to do a very, very sensible, structured job, had quite a big role in the end for a FTSE 100 bank. And then actually realised that there was way more to life. My son had a stroke a week after his first birthday, and it really got me into looking into the sheer power of the mind. Phenomenal structure that it is. It really is such a unique thing to study and learn about, and it can make the difference between living a life that we want to live or living a life that's staid and boring. The reason it was such an interest was my son made a full recovery, and it taught me about neuroplasticity, which maybe we will talk about today. But it made me also realise that what the hell was I doing in this boring corporate job, which was sucking my soul dry, when there was this other side to me. So when I say unconventional skeptic, I do have a very logical brain, very mathematically driven. But on the flip side, I love the spiritual stuff as well. So I love learning how you can use your mind to make your life better, but also add a little bit of the woo in as well. So yeah, I left the bank, set up as my own business, retrained, and now I talk to people, coach them and mentor around using the power of your mind and harnessing it in such a way that you can change your life experiences effectively.
That's amazing. Thanks for telling us about that. I'm kind of curious, if you went back to your time, like in the bank, FTSE, traditional, could you have imagined what you're doing now?
No, not within a million years. And the really hard thing, I think, that I have with this, and I think probably many people have left that structure, I look back at that person now and wish that she knew everything that I know in how to take control of the life that you're living and make changes for yourself. We operate from our memories and our old experiences, and they drive how we interact into our daily lives. And I was obviously operating from a place of playing small and wanting to fit in and, not wanting to rock the boat. Whereas I look back now and think, I would have done things so differently. I would have made changes and used my mind much more effectively. But not in a million years would I think that I'd be doing this kind of thing.
That's really interesting, because obviously I've only met you since, the other side of that transformation or metamorphosis or whatever it is. And I know, because I know a bit about the work that you do, that you can absolutely do corporate, that you can really, you can do corporate, you can do, probably even the power suits and you could do the whole thing, I would have thought.
I've got a whole wardrobe of dresses and suits that just looking at me, I'm thinking I'm never going to wear them again. I need to get rid of them. But yes, I can do corporate. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And yet what I see most of the time actually is, and part of the reason I wanted to have this conversation is this beautiful kind of creative, unique thinking. And obviously I work, I know quite a lot of coaches. I do coaching myself, and obviously we're all kind of curious about how to help people, how to make things better. It kind of goes with the territory of being coached, doesn't it? But I've not met anybody quite like you. And I think in some ways the Venn diagram of our interests and our approach overlaps quite a lot.
Yeah.
But there's this mind coaching, which just to like play on it a little bit, blew my mind when you first told me about it. And so I would like to ask a bit about that. And the way in, I thought, is the first time we discussed it, I think it was on chat, and you said about mind coaching, and I replied a little bit later about mindset coaching, and you said, no. I said mind coaching. Now, I'm sure plenty of people watching this will have heard, have some idea of the concept of a mindset.
Yeah.
But this is different. So what is mind coaching?
So your mind is not set. It's as simple as that. You can change the way that you do things by changing the experiences that you have, and the life that you lead effectively. I'd say that mindset makes it a very structured thing. Whereas if you look at the mind as a structure in itself, it is quite intangible. It's a product of the brain. It's something that can change. It's something like 95% of the stuff that goes on in your mind you're not even aware of. So the work that I do is around bringing that more into your conscious, bringing you from a place of being unaware of what you're doing to a place of being aware, and then helping you be much more focused on building the stuff into your life that you want, that's a positive thing, that is good for change, that's going to support your goals, rather than just operating on that system that's made up of all your old memories from when you're a child right the way through to how you are now. It's very different and focused because it's not following the structure. It's just looking at how you can use that better by having the tips and the knowledge that's all within us to make that happen. So I focus on just highlighting how that's possible, highlighting how you can change your subconscious mind by building new outcomes, building new life experiences that then has a positive knock on in terms of your beliefs and identity, making your subconscious mind then much more conscious, because that's the area you have control over. That's the area you can think about. The subconscious stuff is going on without you probably being aware of it.
So let me just check some of my understanding here. So when you say like we're doing things all the time without even really being aware of doing it, I'm just trying to think that when before we did this, this morning I was at home because I needed to be there for the kids.
Yep.
And I did some coaching, and I knew I had a window of like 45 minutes to get here. I don't really remember. I mean, I wasn't that present while I was doing that. I just went from there to there. So is that the sort of thing that you're talking about? Okay.
Yes, driving is a fantastic example. So when you're learning to drive, if you can remember back, for me, it's quite some time ago, everything, you have to think so hard about it. You have to think about using the clutch. You have to think about the wheel. It takes a lot of effort because it's brand new. It's not a behavior that you've repeated before. So you really have to concentrate. Whereas now, what you've just described to me is the fact that you probably got from your home to the office without really thinking about it, because you've learnt that habit, you've stored it now in your subconscious brain, your subconscious mind. Your brain actually has sort of different areas for things, and once it's stored within your subconscious mind, it uses a different part of your brain, if that makes sense. So it becomes just natural behavior, stuff that you don't even need to think about. So riding a bike, for example, exactly the same process. When you're learning, it's really difficult. You have to really focus. But if I got on a bike now, I wouldn't even think about what I'm doing. It just works.
Right. And you also said, that makes perfect sense, actually, that I mean, when we say that, don't we? It's like riding a bike. You just, and it's true, you can go a long time between riding a bike. And once it's there, it's deep within you. You don't need to think about it. You don't need to relearn it. I suppose, unless maybe you do have some kind of brain injury or a stroke or something like that, and then these kinds of things do get affected. And but people I've seen in my previous work, people who've suffered stroke who can really retrain themselves to walk or to talk or to, I'm not sure about riding a bike, but those kinds of things.
Yes, because your background's within that area as well, isn't it?
Yeah, I used to work in stroke research, so
Yeah.
I know a little bit about it. I'm curious though, let's say I was a client.
Yes.
I was lucky enough to be a client, and we sat down in the first sort of session. What would you be asking me?
I would be encouraging you, first of all, to really think about what it was that you wanted, what change it was that you wanted to make, and what different identity that you wanted to have about yourself. If I look back to how I was within my corporate role, I'd stopped thinking about like a bigger version of my life. You just plod along, trying to get through the day, you're stressed, you're overwhelmed. You don't have necessarily the capacity to think about something else for your future. So it was very much within my subconscious and very vague, any hopes or desires that I wanted. So the first step really is about bringing that into your conscious, because then you can start using some of my work to help make that a reality. So it's like when you're looking to buy a new car, to begin with, there's all sorts of different cars that you might want to be buying. But then you're like, no, do you know what? I really want a yellow Mini. I say yellow Mini because that's very specific. What happens is then your brain starts noticing much more yellow cars, more Minis, occasionally seeing a yellow Mini. I think it's quite rare, so it's not all the time, but you really start to notice it a lot more. And it's because you're training your brain to pick up on the information that you've directed it to look out for. So if you think you're going through life and you haven't taught yourself what it is actually that you want, you're not ever going to get that. So the first part with me is thinking about that big version of your future, getting very specific about what that is, because then it allows systems within your brain to start focusing on that thing and start to make it happen.
That's really interesting. And my mind's going to that idea that our brains are like pattern recognition tools to a large extent. That's what we're wired for. And, way back in human history, that would be that shadow over there is a bit like a lion. That looks like it might be a path through the mountains, recognizing threats and opportunities by spotting those patterns. So essentially what you're saying is, if I understand correctly, is work with that to spot the patterns that are going to take you in an intentional way towards what you actually want. Is that about right?
100%. And it sort of focus on what you've just said as well, in that our brains, obviously, they're wired to see threat. They're wired to see the negative, because prehistorically, that's the way that we stayed alive. So your brains will always want to make sure that you're safe, that you're protected, that you're warm and you have food. It's as simple as that. But what I help my clients do, and my work focuses on, helping them go after what they want rather than just what they need. And that's two very different things. So we need to be safe and we need to have shelter, but we might want something different. And the difficult thing is that it's quite a just juxtaposition. I think that's the wrong word, but it clashes at time, the two. So it can feel uncomfortable. It can feel hard, but that's usually because you are pushing yourself out of what feels safe. And remember, your brain wants to protect you. That's all your subconscious really is. It wants to protect you, and it wants to basically do what you tell it. So it will do what you tell it to, whether that's a good thing or something that's going to hold you back.
Wow. And so I'm thinking I'm getting some free coaching here, by the way. So the reason why I do this.
Stephen.
Oh, why does Stephen have all of these amazing people to come and talk to him every week? It's like, but what I'm kind of fascinated there about what you said was, if you're training your brain to use the same, like, engineering, it's not engineering, is it biology that's been there, since forever? You're training it to look for opportunity rather than threat. Yes. Then what happens? So beyond the yellow minis.
The reason that you're able to do that is there's a it's a bundle of nerves at the bottom of your brainstem called the reticular activating system. And basically that filters information that comes into your brain and directs the traffic of it. So what I want to start my clients doing first of all is filtering that information so they see opportunities, so they see what they want to see, and not what they need to see. So it's seeing the positive rather than the stuff that's going to keep them safe.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, what happens is our brain gets all the information from the environment around us through our 5 senses. So sound, sight, touch, everything. It all comes into the brain, and the brain will organize that information, and it organizes the information based upon the experiences that it has stored. So your brain stores things like memories and actions as experiences. Your subconscious mind feels them, and it will create then and send messages around the body based upon how it's organized that information. So all the work I do is making sure that even the stuff that's coming into our bodies, so the senses, that's good things.
Okay.
So that would be one of the tools I use with my clients is an action board. So this is something that Dr. Tara Swart has devised, very much like a vision board, but it's things on there that you can genuinely want to take action upon. And it works in a similar way to a vision board. So on mine, for example, there's international speaking gigs. Now I'm focusing my sight on that action board, and I can imagine how that would feel when I went onto the stage, and I can hear the applause, and I can smell, the anticipation within the audience. And I'm starting to train my brain that, oh, maybe that's a possibility. Mm-hmm. So then my reticular activating system, that sort of information filtering thing, will start to go, oh, well, we want to filter out the stuff that's not going to support this vision and let things in that is going to support it. So it is very woo in a way, because it's about vision boards and seeing your future, but it's using your brain and your mind to support it.
So what I think is really interesting there is that, like, it didn't sound at all woo when you described it.
No.
And
but when people say vision boards, it is very much like, oh, really?
But you can really see, because of the way that you've described it so beautifully, that if I was to say to somebody, let's go and have a conversation about manifestation, which is not something that I would ever say. However, I don't dismiss that as a practice. I don't think that if I sit down today and I dream of like a garage full of Lamborghinis, that they magically appear in a few years' time. But if a garage full of Lamborghinis, yellow Lamborghinis, can you imagine me in a yellow Lamborghini?
Or a garage full of them as well. I'm impressed.
Why would I want that? But if we just take that, that sort of, I think is a misunderstanding of how this kind of thing works, because there's a lot of hard work between sitting here today and a garage full of Lamborghinis. So I'm going to have to stop that analogy because it just makes me laugh.
I know.
Think about it.
Yeah. Following on from that, when you say something like manifestation, a lot of people will think of things like The Secret, when they just see it in your mind and it's just going to happen if you feel that it can. Yeah. That's just, let's be honest, completely unrealistic. So how is that going to get you a garage full of yellow Lamborghinis?
Yeah.
So the way that I work is actually, let's have something that you can take action upon. Make that a really big vision of your future, one where things do work out, where you do get promotions or you do make change within your life. And then we can look at the actions that you take, supported by your mind, to make that actually happen. It's far more realistic, far more appealing to my unconventional kind of skeptic part of my brain.
But it also has that kind of like there's a logic to it as well, isn't it? It's marrying up both sides of your personality, because you said that you're quite like data, quite logical on the one hand, but then so I love the way that you've described it, because a lot of the things that you're talking about, I mean, I genuinely didn't know about. I'd never really thought about the mind stuff, and I know a bit about the subconscious and the conscious. I know a little bit about the brain. My access into this is more through feeling. So for me, that would be, I know through experience that if I sit and meditate, things change. Okay. And I've never stopped to think how. I'm perfectly comfortable with a woo explanation of that, that I'm connecting with the energy of the universe or something, or it's bringing me into communion with the rest of humanity, or I'm perfectly comfortable with that, but it doesn't explain it. Whereas the way that it actually does explain what's happening.
And your feelings, mentioning meditation there, they're stored within your body. So a lot of the time, I'm sure you probably realize this as well, I'm massive on my exercise. Like, you can change your state by getting some of that energy out of your body as well. So anything that works with that is really important. It's probably also mentioning energy. One of my more woo things is the energy clearing that I do as well, because it gets trapped. The hard stuff that happens to us gets trapped within our body. So anything that we can do to release that, in my mind, is incredibly important, like meditation, because it gives you that pause and moment to breathe and reflect on what's going on.
That's it's fascinating. I'm learning so much. My brain's my actual. I guess it's an issue, isn't it? Like, you're learning new things. So for me, this is new information, even though for me it's like associated with things that I already know. But there's another part of my brain which is going, oh, how do I do something with this?
Yes.
And I guess that's where you come in, isn't it? Like, you walk alongside and you say, right, okay, I could easily get blocked at this point and say, okay, I'm trying to imagine an action board. Obviously, I haven't made one, but then what? What comes next?
And I think if anyone's watching and wants to start applying some of this for themselves, just experimenting on it, it all starts with a thought. It's your thinking that a lot of the time goes on within your subconscious. So 80% of your thoughts are negative, which is horrific to think about. If you start changing just one thought at a time, that impacts your feelings, then that impacts your behaviors and your actions, which then changes your outcomes and your life experiences. So that's my belief cycle. It all ties together. So if you don't, what you want to do is start small. So if you imagine, I want this big change to happen in my life, but I have no idea, action board, brilliant, but what does that actually mean? Just genuinely sit down and think, okay, that ultimately is something I might want. Obviously, you need to know what change you want to make. How can I start now by changing just one or two thoughts that I have about myself? So really simple thing. I always used to tell myself, stop faffing around. You're so disorganized. Just get more organized. Stop faffing. And it was obviously telling my brain that I was then going to be faffing around, because that's what I was dictating it and directing it towards. So you change just one thought like that to, for example, I am becoming more organized as I am putting systems in place. Your whole outlook on how organized you are with work will change.
Wow, that makes complete sense to me. And can I test something from my experience on you to see if it relates? And it's this. I haven't let this thought into my head for a very long time, and there's part of me that doesn't want to. But I used to see myself as slow, in the sense of, like, I just couldn't get things done quickly. And the story that I told myself was, I'm slow, and then probably things like my brain doesn't work as fast as the next person, and then downstream from that, I'm not as clever as the next person, which means I deserve less than the next person. And it would go like that. Probably never conscious, I don't think. Perhaps the bit about being a bit slow. I now see that I am extremely good at working at things over a really long time. So the story I tell myself now is that I have incredible endurance. So of course I'm not zippy. I'm just not wired that way. And so I avoid situations where being zippy, I would never apply for a fast-paced sales job. I'd be terrible, And that doesn't mean that's a bad job. It wouldn't suit me. But I, in the past, might have told, if I'd ended up in a situation like that, I would have said, I'm not very good. I'm bad. I'm not very competent. And the truth is, just in the wrong place. So I said a lot there. Sorry, it was a bit waffly, but
no, I get what you're trying to say. And what you've done there is you've reframed your thought in a much more positive context. So I'm slow to I am basically working and being more endurance.
Yeah.
So you could say, I'm doing things at my own pace. I'm sticking in my lane, and this is working for me.
Wow. Yeah. Amazing.
So we all have a different pace that we go at. And this falls back into this whole comparisonitis thing and wanting to be like other people or fitting in or whatever. But knowing that you've got your own strengths is really essential there. And it comes back to initially knowing what you're good at, what you want to change, what you're after. It's all about being much more self-aware.
Yeah.
And where that's concerned, there's this concept, which I know I've mentioned to you, called cognitive diffusion. So it's when you see your thoughts as being very, very separate to you. So an example of that might be that somebody who doesn't look at this would say that thoughts are actually fact, whereas thoughts are something I'm just telling myself. They're not true.
Yeah.
It's very much thinking, if you're having a really horrible day and you're thinking, oh, God, why am I like this? I'm just so useless. You very much take that and think, actually, well, why am I saying this? And you look at it almost from a third person and think, am I useless? What evidence have I got to support that? And a lot of the time, there isn't the evidence there. So it's very much keeping that separate to yourself. So I'm slow. Why am I thinking I'm slow? It's not something that makes up who I am. And so you can change it.
Do you know what? Something I love about your approach, and again, like I say, I know lots of coaches, is that you just took a bunch of waffle from me.
It wasn't waffle. It made sense in my mind. So maybe that's.
But the way that you reflected it back to me, which is a coaching practice. Okay, so for those who don't know, it's a part of the coaching method is that you allow somebody to speak, and then you say it back, and you try and use as many of the words that they use, but you're essentially saying, "Can I check my understanding?" You're basically doing that. That validates what the person said, and that helps them to feel seen, which helps them to open up, which helps the transformation process. What you just did there was you did that, but you gave me words. You gave me almost like little mini mantras. You took what I said and said, well, how about this? And how about that? And how about that in just an instant? And I think that's unusual. That's an unusual skill.
Is it? See, I've always been able to do that. I think my brain works in a very different way. Certainly if I was doing a maths problem, I'd work it out. Probably 95% of the time it would be different to everybody else's way of working it out. It's just how I function. But anybody can do this for themselves as well. If you become really self-aware of what the language that you're using, and you could have a sort of a discussion with yourself, as we've just had, around that kind of language, then you can help to make those changes. As you said, though, it just helps having a coach to do the active listening, reflect back, and look at an alternative perspective.
Yeah. It's fascinating. Can I change direction slightly? I know you don't exclusively work with women, but you do, if you were to look at your website and, LinkedIn profile talks about ambitious female leaders and things like that. Do you think, also, how is this useful to women specifically?
How is it useful to women? I think traditionally, and from a very early age, certainly from my experience and from a lot of my clients that I've worked with, we have almost molded ourselves to fit in with society to make sure that we're okay, and we've been told that we're good girls to get what we want. And really, it's playing into this traditional concept that that's how we should be, rather than the person that we really want to be, which might be a completely different person. So, for example, you're told to brush your teeth when you're small. Go upstairs, you brush your teeth. Your parents say, well done, you brush your teeth. You've learned, oh, if I do the right thing, I get a pat on the head. And from my experience, I've learned that boys sometimes buck against that. They don't mind so much. So they're not being taught to fit into this mold that society has portrayed upon us. Being different, now that works both sexes, but I think where women are concerned is that you don't want to be different at work and stand up and, change the status quo, because that has an impact maybe on how you're seen amongst your colleagues, which matters to us a lot. I'm aware, obviously, this stuff relates to males as well.
Yeah.
It's just that the tendency is to play small, whereas a male will, it's like imposter syndrome. Traditionally, if you had a CV and you gave it to a woman, the description of the duties that they would have to do, not a CV, a job description, sorry.
Yeah.
They'd look down at it and go, can do that, can do that, can do that. Can't do that one, so I can't apply. Whereas a man, and it's a proven fact, would look down and say, well, I can't do that, but I'm sure I'll be able to pick it up some point along the way. And it's just that slight difference in attitude that the kind of work that I do, whilst it is effective across the board, it's the playing small that women tend to do that I want to just take and just shake it out of people, because there's other ways to do this.
Yeah.
You get to have one life. You spend most of the time at work or running a business. Surely it can work better for you in the way that you want, rather than just under the lens of other people's expectations.
Wow. That's like a manifesto. That's amazing. And I think...
Yeah. People have the Bronnie Weir, who was a palliative nurse, she's written this book about the 5 regrets of the dying. And the biggest regret is that I wish I hadn't done everything else to other people's expectations. And if sometimes we went against the grain and stood up for more of what we wanted, rather than what we perceived was appropriate for us, yes, it means that you could be seen as being a bit more aggressive than assertive, perhaps, or that you're a bit, who's that person to do that? And it causes ripples. But surely later on in life, when you look back and reflect on what you've had, wouldn't you rather have that?
As well, I think what's really interesting, I totally understand what you said. Obviously, I don't have the lived experience of being a woman, but everything that you've said, I can see it in female friends and family members and things like that. I totally understand that. And I think there's the additional thing we probably don't have time to go into today, which is my way of saying, can we do this again? In how obviously the expectations around family and stuff like that the pressures are different. And obviously there are certain things that, only apply to women in that regard. And then what's on the other side of having a family or thinking about a family, all of that. So I think having people who are like you, who've got the lived experience of all of that and doing the transformation yourself. I mean, you must be a very powerful person to walk alongside. I'm sure you are. I just sort of with that, and maybe to start to close it out a little bit, like you mentioned the wheel Would you just say a little bit more about that? Because I love a virtuous circle, and I know that that's why.
Yeah, and it is a very virtuous circle. So it's called the belief cycle, and you can start at any one point on this wheel. But I always focus on a thought. So your thoughts influence your feelings, which influence your behaviors. Now that's the cognitive triangle in itself. So an example of that would be you're going down a dark lane late at night and you hear a noise up in the bushes ahead. Now you can think that's a cat. I'm absolutely fine. I feel safe. I'm going to carry on walking. Or you can think that's someone hiding in the bushes coming out to attack me, and you turn and run. Now that's just a thought, but it instigates a whole different experience for you. And those thoughts that you have will be based upon the fact that you've seen a cat in that bush hundreds of times, as opposed to that one time that it wasn't so safe for you. So that's the thing that you're going to remember. So the cognitive triangle, and then on top of that, I loop it into those behaviors and actions that you have will then give you different outcomes and different life experiences, which build our identity. So that's the mind. Change this wheel just to make small different changes to how you're thinking, how you're feeling, the way you're acting and behaving. That's when it can impact things like your identity. So my program that's starting in September is entirely focusing on this. It's a 3-month program. It will look at that big version of your life that you want and use the belief cycle, the power of the brain, and the more slightly woo stuff to really support that.
That sounds amazing. Amazing. I was going to ask you about that, and it was actually seeing a couple of things that you started to briefly mention that, but I don't think it's kind of out there properly yet, is it?
No, it's not. I'm very excited about it. It's going to be, I hope, revolutionary for the people that do it. And it's going to be slightly different, I feel, to a lot of coaching that I've done in the past. And there's a lot of content, there's a lot of knowledge going into it. I want people to try stuff out, and I want people to come and take ownership of themselves and how they're genuinely living in their lives. It's a case of radical responsibility, I guess, for how their lives are, and then taking action to make that change.
Wow. So somebody could sign up to your program.
Yes.
They could sign up now. If they sent you an email, would
Yes, they could sign up now. I need to figure, as I said, I haven't put it out there in the world yet, so I don't have any massive links.
We're doing it now, Phil. We're putting it out in the world.
Yes, yeah, but it's starting mid-September. We'll run until Christmas, and it's going to be revolutionary.
Do you know, I'm really excited for you and for anybody that participates in that. I really am, and it also fits it. It pushes some of the buttons for me about what I love. That's a season. That's like, things change in seasons. So just imagine, somebody that's watching this or hearing you talk, they have their summer holidays, they come back, and then by Christmas, things are different. I mean, that's a pretty cool thing.
I mean, my mum was a primary school teacher and my sister is a primary school teacher. So I'm very much on the school thing. So it's a new start. September is always a new start for me. And you've got that time between now and the end of the year to really take back control of your life.
Yeah. Wow. So obviously it's like the more people that I encourage to join your program, the fewer people come and join my program. But honestly, I just want to
very different things.
I just want to celebrate it because I genuinely, and the reason why I want to do this, like there's loads of coaches out there. I think maybe we should probably wrap it up now because we've gone on a little bit longer than I usually do. But there are loads of coaches out there. And if anybody's watching this and is in any doubt, you don't actually have to have any kind of qualification to call yourself a coach. Phil and I are both qualified. We've both spent a long time learning how to do the practice of coaching, and yet I think that the way that you and I were taught, it needs to evolve and it needs to be something new because the world has changed fundamentally in the last few years, what with COVID and massive shifts in the way that the workforce works. Everybody questioning, quite rightly, what they're doing with their precious time on earth. And so when you say, right, working with a qualified coach, a structured program, loads of content, loads of learning. I mean, this actually is genuinely new, this way of working. So I just want to celebrate it. I think what you're doing, Phil, is like, I've had the privilege to learn a little bit more about it in a bit more detail. And which is why I wanted to have this conversation, to sort of like open it up to a few more people, because I think it's genuinely revolutionary. I haven't seen anything quite like it. I think you are wonderful, the way that you approach every conversation, your commitment to it, your knowledge is astonishing, and your ability to synthesize that and give it to people. Like you gave me a couple of gifts today, and this is my actual job. Like, so
it's amazing that we get to have this kind of discussion, and hopefully one person listening will go, do you know what? I can do something about this. I can make a change.
Yeah.
And that has such positive ripple effects around their whole community.
Yeah, wonderful. So if anybody's been inspired by this, they can get on your website, go and get in touch. I'd encourage anybody that's even remotely thinking about it to get in touch and have a conversation, even if that's just by email. You don't want to miss this opportunity, because I would imagine when you do it again in January, it's going to be a lot more expensive. And it's going to be
evidence. My plan is that I collect data and evidence as I go along to really, track the changes that are being made. So
amazing.
I'll have my evidence. Yeah.
Wonderful. Right. So
thank you so much, Stephen. I really appreciate it.
That's good. Anything you'd like to say before we wrap up?
No, all I want to say is it's up to you. If you're aware of what things you're telling yourself that aren't supporting you with making change in your life, you can change that. It's just one thought. Yeah.
Perfect. Let's leave it there. Thank you so much, Phil. And anybody else that's watching, any regulars, look forward to seeing you in another LinkedIn Live in a week or so's time.
Lovely. Thank you,
Bye-bye.
Stephen. Everyone.